Time. No, the other time. Thank you. Much better. Time. For some, time is a wheel. An infinite repetition of what came before and what is yet to come. Looping endlessly over and over. For others, time is an arrow. Pressing faithfully forward.
What's going on, everyone? It's Sam. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I wanted to take a deep dive into the question that many people currently have since the Loki finale, and that is, does free will exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I'll be giving two sides to this, one from a logistical standpoint and one from a philosophical point of view. So if you like Marvel, the MCU, comics, and everything in between, subscribe to the channel. But other than that, let's get into the video. Let's go. Free will is a crazy and complex question, and honestly, there's no definitive answer in our everyday lives, and ultimately, how would you know? You don't. But if we do apply a philosophical approach to the MCU, the answer could simply be yes. But why? Free will is defined as the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate, or in simpler terms, it is the ability to act freely on your own at your own discretion. In philosophy, there are other types of thought experiments and thought processes that try to counteract the nature of free will. A couple of the main ones that we'll be looking at are determinism and free won't. And I know these are all big words, but bear with me here. If we take a look at the definition of free will and apply it to the MCU, and more specifically what He Who Remains or Kang said at the end of the finale, it would appear that free will doesn't exist, but that's actually not the case. He Who Remains says he knows all, but then he said he doesn't until a certain point. And that point was when the threshold was crossed. Many people took this as if he was lying or knew what would happen. But it's possible that even Kang is on a preconceived path as well. And we know that there are higher levels of powers in Marvel Comics and in the Marvel Universe. The most notable being the one above all, who is responsible for the existence of all life in the multiverse and possibly beyond. There's also other beings like the Living Tribunal, whose statue we actually see inside of the Void, but we haven't seen these characters yet. It's possible that the one above all sets the path for everyone, and if that's the case, free will wouldn't exist, but that's also if you believe in a single god or any sort of god for that matter. Is it a person, is it a being, or is it an energy that controls all, or simply just the universe existing? Which is another question scientists struggle with. Is the universe considered a living thing? If Kang knows all, he wouldn't have said what he said, and honestly, I think he was being truthful. I think overall Sylvie was meant to kill him, and the universe and the threshold was crossed because it was always going to happen. And you may ask, well, why couldn't he have known? Because he couldn't know or experience death. He's never gone through it. It is the one thing that we all have in common and that all of our characters have in common. We cannot experience or know what comes after death. So if we look at it like this, free will doesn't exist. However, let's forget about any other higher beings. Let's only take a look at the evidence that we have within the MCU at this current time. He Who Remains, or Kang, like I just said, he knows all. He even had papers with exact dialogue of what would happen. But that doesn't mean free will doesn't exist, and it specifically doesn't mean that he controls it all. He just knows what will happen. He said that he was able to manage the flow of time, but he didn't create the flow of time. He was just able to see a timeline on a linear or looped runway as we saw. So knowing all of what could happen is far different than actually scripting exact events of an entire timeline. He merely navigated the timeline, and that is why branches can exist. The choice or odds of something else happening still exists. Cap still had to choose to stay with Peggy and create an alternate timeline. Tony had to become Iron Man. Black Widow had the choice of attempting to assassinate Dreykov's daughter to get into S.H.I.E.L.D., and one of the biggest ones, Thanos had the choice to continue or give up on his Stones quest. All of these decisions could have, and potentially did, create alternate timelines. So the idea of choice exists, and even though Kang and the TVA prune these timelines, the sole reason that the TVA has to exist is because the choices that people can make can branch the timeline. Like Kang says, without this, everything burns. The TVA was only necessary because of people's choices. Kang cut off the idea of furthering people's free will, but essentially they still had it. Now this is in terms of only using Kang and what we have in the MCU now as evidence. Knowing what will happen and completely scripting what will happen are two very different things. Branches and timelines are paths of time which we don't know about, and choices counteracting that timeline overall. So we talked about free will and choices, but what about free won't? Free won't is your ability to veto your thoughts or impulses. You don't have to enact on every desire simply because it comes to your mind and was available to you, but then again, how did that thought process actually come to you? There's actually a thought experiment called the Libet experiment, and it was to sort out if free will is an illusion or not. People were neurally connected to a computer and would press a button when they felt that they should decide to move. However, what happened prior to that decision to move or press the button, what was actually being studied. And so Libet found that the unconscious brain activity leading up to the conscious decision by the person actually began approximately half a second before the person consciously felt that they should decide to move. So it's almost as if your brain or a force sends a message to your conscious when to do something. And so by that logic, our wills and freedom are simply not of our own making. Neuroscientists later experimented based on this finding, and their conclusion was that conscious control comes after the decision to do something. Therefore, free will does not exist because nature is providing the course of your own action. And unfortunately, there's not really much that can negate that, but further research of the brain may help us find this answer.
The potential of a multiverse is literally infinite. We can already look at our singular universe with awe. One decision begets another and another. We like to say that the possibilities are endless. But in a singular timeline, that is simply not the case. Each falling grain of sand in an hourglass changes how every other grain will fall.
This falls into another philosophical term, determinism, which states that all events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes external to our own will. Look at it almost like the timeline that we see looped around Kang. If we're able to time travel or see things before they happen or alter those events, technically that course of action is set. But then again, if you can alter them, doesn't that give you free will? Now, if you believe in this idea of determinism and a pre-controlled path, it also brings up ethical questions of can you hold people morally responsible for their actions if they have no free will or control? It's a heavy question to ask yourself, and there's actually new forms of technology that police in Canada are using to predict future crimes, referred to as predictive policing. Now, I won't get too into it, but you can go check out Minority Report, which is a film that focuses on surveillance to arrest these would-be criminals before they can act out on their intentions. It truly is an interesting topic, but that's something for a whole nother video. So what have we learned and how can we connect this to the MCU and life in general? Honestly, there is simply no true answer. You could argue that there is free will, you could argue that there isn't. If there isn't, then there simply just isn't. But if you do believe in free will, then it does exist in the MCU, because Star-Lord had to make the choice to hit Thanos. Maybe he was predetermined to, but we truly have no way to say yes or no to that answer. And like Strange says, it was the only way. Not to mention that the fact that Strange saw 14,605 outcomes, this proves that there was different scenarios and choices to be made. Without one of these forms of philosophy, you can argue that the idea of free will simply wouldn't and couldn't coexist. Laws say that one force must act upon another, a tug-and-pull relationship in nature. The idea of a choice versus none. Maybe there is a predetermined path that we can choose freely on. Maybe we create our own branch timelines every day and we wouldn't even know right now. As far as we've come with technology, this is the one thing that we still can't find out. But maybe like our friend or villain Kang told us, hopefully someone by the 31st century can find out. And as one final thought, I'll leave you with this.
We're both masters of our own destiny and victims of circumstance. There's simply no knowing how things will turn out until they happen. As William Shakespeare wrote in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, it ain't over till it's over.
Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I took some philosophy of life studies a few years back and have always loved this topic. So let me know what you think about this in the comments, and do you believe in free will? Does it exist in the MCU? At the core, and to keep it simple to just enjoy life, you can just say yes. But anyway, you can follow me on Twitter at AnotherMarvelG for all news and updates though. If you like this video, drop a like, make sure to subscribe for more videos. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. I'm Another Marvel Guy, and I'll catch y'all in a blip.